a little bit of a change of pace from our usual forum in which my friend Two Sheds or Kevin is joining me. I've actually never had a guest other than him. So today I have Anthony Holtberg with interest in alchemy, Western Hermeticism or Western Esotericism, and lots of other things. So welcome, Anthony.
I've never been interviewed for anything like this, so this is completely new territory for me.
Oh, okay. Well, fun. Yeah, this is cool. I could just see by I was actually looking a little bit at your thesis that you wrote for University of Exeter.
It actually bizarrely wasn't my preferred topic. I had
Which
hoped to do.
which was your
What's that?
preferred topic?
Well, I was hoping to do game theory, where there's a unique connection between Enochian chess, which I don't know if you've ever heard of that or even know what it is.
I can guess, but go ahead and.
The Enochian chess was essentially it was a game of sorts, kind of, developed by the Golden Dawn.
Oh,
It uses a divination device, and there's actually a history of games and divination device. I mean, look, tarot cards are playing cards. There are games played with them. But I hope
right.
to show correlations between um, Chaturanga coming from the east to the Alfonso X's Libro de Juegos, which features a game called the Game of Four Seasons, which is a form of chess played with four players, but you can actually use dice to
Mm.
randomize the elements and can be used as a divination instrument. Anyways, it was really, really, really
Now,
cool and really
I'm
interesting.
just guessing here, but it sounds kind of like there's a randomizing element or a way that you insert chance into a game of chess. So instead of moving your pieces logically, you move them according to what the dice tell you to move them. Is that correct? Or
That's absolutely, and the
okay,
concept is to essentially, it's just like it's very involved casting of lots. You're attempting to have the various elements represent something, and then hopefully receive some sort of insight regarding whatever concerns you had.
oh, that's interesting. This is a little bit off topic, but I probably will never have a chance to mention this in my life, so I might as well mention it now. Once I was on a cruise ship for my dad's 70th birthday. There's a game room on the ship, and there was Trivial Pursuit and chess. And somehow I was like, why don't we combine the two and we can make a new game called Trivial Chess? And you answer a trivia question, and if you get it right, you're allowed to. It's two teams, and the team that gets it right can decide on where they move the chess piece, and then the next team has to answer a trivia question correctly to move the chess piece. And I realized neither of these games are copyrightable. So if someone just puts the two together and makes Trivial Chess and boxes it, they could make millions of dollars. And there, I just I gave the world the idea for Trivial Chess. I don't
The,
know if
the
that's
that game must be eternal because that would take forever. And imagine
yeah,
if you end up in a stalemate. Good lord.
right, right. But anyway, yeah, this is interesting. So you said that it's an Enochian. What's the Enochian element to it? Is it just the fact that it's
So
randomized, or it involves like kind of divination of sorts?
Enochian is really fascinating because it's actually not. Everyone treats it like it's its own little universe. It's its own cell of magical praxis. The thing about this is that's really fascinating is that it's not that at all. It's what my specialty was medieval and Renaissance astrological, demonic, magical practices. Doesn't that roll off
Okay.
the tongue?
No, that's it sounds fascinating.
It is, but the thing about Enochian is that it's very much within keeping of the Solomonic, or what you'd see in Renaissance grimoires with all of the elements of orations and supplications and perfumes to some sort of entity. The interesting thing about it is that why people mistake it as this new thing is because John Dee was in England, and England wasn't at that point in time a big fan of Catholics.
Mm.
So if you put out suffumigations or perfumes, which are what Catholics use for their masses, you'd end up in the Tower of London. And he'd already spent a stint there, and he did not want to go back.
So it's not that you're actually evoking Beelzebub. It's just the perfume they don't like.
I guess. Which is funny, and actually, there's more to it than that, more to that than you think, because most people have this sense that magic practitioners were outside of very much like an opponent of the church of some sort. It was all very much within the church. Like the person who translated, you mentioned that I studied Hermeticism. I do. The Corpus Hermeticum was translated by Marsilio Ficino, he was a member of the clergy.
Yeah.
And he was cozied up to the de Medici family to get the capacity to be able to translate it. He would send the Pope astrological insights and things like that. He did his natal chart, if I'm not mistaken. So it's one of those things that it was very much within the clergy that esoterica bloomed. So it's not like this outlier thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I understand that a lot of those people for whom we credit, to whom we credit birthing or rebirthing, um, you know, the Hermetic or Neoplatonism or
Mm-hmm.
Hermeticism, or classical paganism into the Renaissance were themselves, Catholics. You probably couldn't escape being a Catholic to a certain extent
No,
at that time, but like Giordano
in England, yes.
Bruno,
Yes, yes, yes,
Pico
yes.
de Mirandola, Ficino, all these people probably had positions in the church. So, but of course, at some point, so in our world, we see that these two things are kind of diametrically opposite in the sense that a lot of people are pagan, a lot of people are Christian, and they kind of fight. But in that time, there was some overlap. But in the case of someone like Bruno or something, you could cross the line into heresy and get whacked.
Well, Bruno didn't know how to dance the line like so many others. And there's a fantastic book by Daniel Pickering. Was it D.P. Walker? I forget what his first name was. D.P. Walker wrote a book called Spiritual and Demonic Magic. And he essentially writes this fantastic expose of these Renaissance clergymen, and they were closet pagans. I mean, if you look into their manuscripts, I mean, it was literally just paganism. They especially Ficino in his De Triplicity Vita was overtly pagan. He made the
Yeah.
lightest of gestures of being a Christian, then just moved right past it.
Yeah. Yeah. Were a lot of these people kind of inspired by Platon and the other
Yes, very
scholars that
much.
came over from Constantinople?
You have exactly right. So it's
Yeah.
so you have what was his name? I want to say Giovanni Gimisto. He was the was I forget which one was but yes, you have it very right with the Neoplatonism and Platon, and
Yeah.
that the Platonism that came in from the Renaissance is essentially what drove people to start questioning that Aristotelian concept, where you had a church that at that era was essentially just trying to control the flow of information by making all experimentation illegal. Um,
Mhm.
so if you were to not use the givens, using Aristotelian logic, the givens that were supplied by church authorities in making any sort of point, if you didn't do that, you were burnt at the stake. So it is a fascinating thing where
Yeah.
these people who were visionaries, who were so close to, I mean, I mean, when you look at the magus of that era, they were incredibly intelligent, extraordinarily well read. They were adventurers. They were
Yeah.
scholars. They were linguists. They were navigators. I mean, it was amazing. They had
Right.
all these skills underneath their hats, and to have that much visionary capacity untapped because you couldn't actually explore these concepts, even though you were seeing them and interacting with them on a daily basis. This is why you see folks like John Dee, who was just a staggering intellect that could not stop himself from examining in this practical aspect. And even
Mm.
when you look within the grimoires, they were labeled as experiments. So it's really fascinating.
That's interesting. Do you think, given that some of these Renaissance men, as it were, like real Renaissance men of that period, some of them couldn't toe the line and were driven to explore all these new kind of the rebirth of the Renaissance, the rebirth of classical learning, and they couldn't really kind of put the cat back in the bag, and some of them got executed for it. Do you think that was what spawned this well, it probably preceded that, but like the idea that we have in our modern terms, in our modern sense of something being um, like Faustian, like the myth of Dr. Faustus, who had all this learning and knowledge, and it got into something that was forbidden, and he went astray of kind of the moral order of his time. Like,
So the Faustian figure.
Does this Faustus legend come after or before these people in the Renaissance?
So it comes after, and what's fascinating about that, this is well studied, is that were you already aware of this? That John Dee was actually quite the figure for Faust. I
Oh,
mean,
so
I
there
think
wasn't a German Faust, or
no, and
oh,
that's the
okay,
thing is you have to understand that Germany is the heart of the Renaissance. In Tübingen, they had a printing press, which was where everything went through. So anything that would get printed, anything that would get looked at, came through there. This is where you get the Rosicrucian manifestos, where they were set out of Tübingen. Naturally, if you think about the Rosicrucian manifestos, one of the key manuscripts has the Monus Hieroglyphica of John Dee on the cover of it. So Germany, John Dee, the Rosicrucians, his symbol, the flow of literature and the elements that they drew on. Yes, very much. John Dee was Faust.
oh wow,
So there are fantastic, like just a plethora of these well written articles that explored that concept. Well, I find that somewhat fascinating. I was more interested in the practical aspects of it, but it's still a fascinating thing. That's why you kind of get this villainized or this evil view of John Dee, and he would pop up in fiction as this necromancer and this vile person, which is funny because I mean when you look at he was essentially just this really gentle person, like very and how he
yeah.
would phrase things was very polite, even when he had these crazy frantic disagreements with Edward Kelly. Would be like he was screaming at the top of his lungs
I
that
thought Edward Kelly was the scoundrel,
he
or is
was a
that
scoundrel, and John Dee was not even remotely a scoundrel. You could tell that these two didn't get alike, as because the only note he made when he died is, "Oh, he died," and that was it. There was no like real connection there.
that's
And he did.
interesting.
It wasn't his only seer. It's possibly only his most well recorded one. He went through a series of them, but it's fascinating to look at this very kindly, this very disciplined person. In fact, I'd argue that his biggest downfall was actually his loyalty to England. So that politic, that aspect of things, that because as he was exploring these things and he was getting these visions being demanded by angels to demand kings to convert or not be to convert to Christianity or to convert to faith and everything like that, he essentially made himself a political pariah when he would, he had access to their courts and he was well respected, and this pursuit more or less kind of broke him. So it's really
Wow,
fascinating that his own
that's
pursuits of wanting to understand this, how nature worked, is also what destroyed him. So it's kind of
interesting.
that's the Faustian figure.
Wow. Very cool. I have one a question in some of our brief exchanges on just through email. You mentioned a person who was your mentor,
Yeah.
and let's see, Chemset Rising or Kim
Yes. So
Kaigon,
Kem Kagan, who
Kagan.
is,
Do you want to talk about him a little bit, or because
do I want
I've
to
never
talk
heard
to
of this
him? Is he
person?
here with us
No, you
now?
can talk to him. Let's see. Let's summon him.
Yeah.
No, but
I wouldn't do that.
he strikes me what little that I mean I didn't dig that deeply, but I was able to look a little bit on some of his writings online and his alchemical interests and his chemical or scientific interests. He did strike me as almost like a Paracelsian type figure from I don't know. I mean, he seemed like an interesting guy, but if I want to give you a chance to talk about him because I have no idea who this person is.
So the name of the person you're talking about is literally the person who actually taught me everything about what I know. The man was uh, deep spectrum Asperger's to the point of collating his friend's library for 3 days straight, subsisting on cans of pumpkin and coffee. And then he would fall over, and he was happy as a clam doing it. So it's one of
Wow.
those things that his level of reading, his capacity to explicate any topic was staggering. Usually, our conversations were him just talking about stuff and me just going, "Oh," really.
I've met
And I remember at one point,
I've
I
met
went,
people like
I
that.
can't,
Yeah.
I can't wait till the point where I can actually add something to our conversations. Up until this point, I really can't say anything. So
Right.
it was really fascinating. The thing about this is that so who he was an extraordinary scholar par excellence on a level of reading that I have only seen very rarely. I know folks like Claire Fanger. Oh my God, her reading is incredible, and her she has this graceful ability to just gently tiptoe across these massive academic controversies in just an introduction and very neatly sweep them away. So it's really that level of readership, that level of knowing how to phrase things. That's where I put him. So he essentially was a practitioner. He was not a scholar proper. He never even finished high school. He actually got on his bicycle at the age of 16 and rode away from his abusive family from Texas all the way to Florida, and then from Florida he bicycled to New York. So
Wow.
he actually became one of the youngest editors for Weiser Publishing at the age of
Really?
18. Yes, he had phone calls that he had conversations with Ray Gardee, Israel Ray Gardee, and apparently he wouldn't talk to Kim ever again because he had correctly seen how Ray Gardee used a lot of Atwood's writings and within his own to explicate things. And he's like, no teenager should know this much about this topic. So he wouldn't talk to me or give him the willies. What our focus was and what his focus was is we were parsing it as a Renaissance scholar would, which they were not interested in this ethereal spiritual concept. They were interested in defining nature. So what we were doing was essentially trying to find a scientific means of explicating the interactions of the magus of that era. What does that mean? So essentially we'd break down the practice. We'd look at what causes ecstatic visions or ecstatic states within meditation to arise. How can those be parsed via neuroscience? And actually had some I made contact with some folks within neuroscience. Actually even reached out to Dennis Stillings, and
Okay.
he was currently doing a nonprofit in Hawaii because he'd worked for Earl Bakken, who was the CEO of Medtronic, that's the largest medical technology distributor in the entire world. Anyways, Earl Bakken was the guy who created the portable pacemaker. And what's funny is most people don't know that what his inspiration wasn't like some, this scientific or this wish to help people. He loved galvanics. He liked
Oh wow.
Frankenstein.
Yeah.
He wanted to reanimate people, right?
Wow.
So that's that. And then actually, every year they would get together and have a party where they would watch Frankenstein, the classic Frankenstein. So it's really fascinating. So he gave Dennis Stillings, with all this massive amount of money, an endless budget to explore the unknown using scientific exploration. And actually, even to this day, there's the Bakken Museum of Electrical History still has this massive catalog of what do they call it? Quackery, these like
Oh.
radionics and things like devices and such sort. And if you can manage to write them a paper and say you want to study it and you have a good reason to, you can actually get a look at all this stuff and actually deal with it.
Where is this?
In I believe Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Okay. Yeah.
So, definitely worth a look. It's really fascinating. Anyways, I go far afield and I tend to ramble, so do please help keep me focused.
Oh no. This is good. Yeah. So this is Kim Kagan's main field. Is this almost a neuroscience of like visions or of
He would put it.
I
He would
mean,
put it as it's the actual practice that the Renaissance magus was doing. They were scientists first. That's how
mhm,
they saw themselves. They
yeah.
weren't seeing themselves as spiritual figures. They thought of themselves as very much seeking to understand nature. So anyways, George Hansen wrote a book called The Trickster and the Paranormal. This book is possibly the best treatment of the issue of trying to prove anything to do with psychic, paranormal, magic phenomenon in the field of science. All
Okay.
that being said, there is one book that attempts to create a rubric to parse all this that is called The Terror That Comes in the Night. And this is by a fellow named Hufford, and I believe it's available by Penn State Press. But anyways, He creates a fantastic way to create a constellation of features via folklore or whatever you want to examine, and essentially by interviewing people and making sure the constellation of features matches within all these dialogues given, he thinks that you could show a cultural phenomenon of some sort that would lead towards proving some these aspects that could only be proven through human experience.
Right.
He chose hypnagogia, or the sleep paralysis and the experiences with the hag or the nightmare. And some of these stories and the features that he features within this extraordinarily dry, very serious, very scientific, very hard to slog through text were incredible in how similar they were between these very disparate folks in areas of Newfoundland. So, anyways,
Interesting.
That is the aspect that we were looking at. We were looking at as though, how is this real? I mean, because there are so many experiences throughout history. There's so many things that are crossing between cultures and times that we still experience commonly. We may be biologically wired for it, and if so, for what reason?
Yeah.
So these are the questions that plague.
Right. I feel like, I mean, I can go in a million different directions with this conversation now, because you kind of opened up a very wiggly can of worms that can spew out in lots of different directions. But I mean, there's a few things you mentioned, like when you started talking about the issue of sleep. I studied sleep quite a bit, and how sleep in the 19th century was seen as people were looking to solve the mind-body problem through studying sleep. And some people who, you'd have people who thought that mind stuff was all just physical, and others who thought that the will was somehow disembodied, and that it was spiritual, purely spiritual, and that you could prove this by doing things like willing in advance to wake up. Like, let's say you were going to sleep and then you willed in advance to wake up tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., obviously without an alarm clock or something. And some people were able to do this. Like, they could wake up at a predetermined hour from a very deep sleep. And by doing so, some would say that they showed themselves to be, that their will was not connected to their bodies, because in sleep, scientists thought that they kind of sloughed off the will in sleep, like you were a willless creature, like an animal in sleep. And by by willing to wake up at a predetermined hour, your will was kind of like disembodied and separate from your body, and then you can kind of like, almost as a ghost, tap yourself on the shoulder at 6 a.m. and wake yourself up. It was this strange writing at that time of mid to late 19th century, where people were...
I can tether this together with a few different things.
Go ahead.
So, number one, within Stoic physics, which is very much tied into, because if you look at magic of the Renaissance, it was very much like a Stoic heat engine within its way it was set. I'm not going to explore that. Well, anyways, right. So within Stoic physics, the notion of sleep was that it was like you're half dead. Now, what's fascinating about that, it's the idea of the not the separation of the soul, but the loosening of the soul. Now, when we look at that, let's look at that term. Now, within certain shamanic practices, and I'll again plug another book. There's a fantastic book by, I'm going to butcher his name because it's Romanian. Anyways, or it's not Romanian, is it? Anyways, Mircea Eliade. It is shamanism, archaic techniques of ecstasy.
Right.
The only large misstep he makes in that amazing book otherwise is stating that shamans did not use entheogens or any sort of mind-altering substance to assist with their... That's completely false. Anyways,
right.
That's his only misstep. But back to the thing. Shamanism talks about sickness as soul loss, which is fascinating, because when you talk about out-of-body experiences, OBEs, or whatever, things like that, there are some people that have experiences of this terror or dread in having left their body unprotected for so long. and things like that. So there is this fascinating thing where if disease and sickness is soul loss, the idea of death being or sleep being the loosening of the soul, death is a complete loss of it. And if you look within meditative procedures, there's what within Kabbalistic sources called the kiss of God, where if you go too far in your meditations, so within meditation there's a wave-like element where they would lower their heart rate and increase their heart rate. Some people, like the shamans in I think they're Yakut shamans, would do this via drinking extraordinarily prodigious amounts of alcohol and leaping around, then immediately laying down for periods of time, then jumping around again. But then you have the Tibetan Yogin, which does it through breathing practices that consciously controls the automatic functions of their body. Anyways, if you lose track, you have to bring your heart rate so low that it's almost stopped. You lose track, it can just stop, which is really fascinating concept. So when you talk about this sort of thing, this idea of dreams and sleep and its correlation to the mystic, there is an immense body of data from all sorts of different cultures that corroborate this sort of idea.
So the other thing I was thinking, you brought up, you talked a little bit about the Aristotelian categorization. I think it was in your thesis. You're talking about the great chain of being.
Oh yes. So the great chain of being that's a fascinating concept. So where are you going to go with it?
Oh, real quick. So I just feel like some of this, even what Kim Kagan, just the way you describe it, in order to map out in terms of like a natural philosophy or early science, as far as we would see it, and depicting things that in our modern terms we would usually call spiritual experiences, and to turn and to show that they are actually not other. They're not so divorced from nature. Basically, it seems a little bit like he's trying to reconcile Platonism and Aristotelianism. I mean, I don't know if that goes too far, but we think of Platonism as this strict divorce between the world of forms, the transcendent, and then the world of material particular. Well, there's this dichotomy between the spiritual and the natural. And then in Aristotelianism, the forms don't actually exist. They're just the highest order of the great chain of being, and it's not disconnected from being, or it's not disconnected.
You're talking hylomorphism, yes?
Yeah, it's not disconnected from nature. So, in other words, someone who's like a radical empiricist would say, just because you're having these dreams or these visions that seem outside of the natural world, or outside of, they're metaphysical, they're outside of the physical, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are not true or can be somehow arrived at through some kind of scientific explanation.
The reason, I dislike Aristotle because of his rather authoritarian way of seeing nature, as though it is a matter controlled, overseen, etc. And this even goes into how he saw people and things like that via his discussion of naturals, which is a controversy in the modern era that is not understood within its context, but still is controversial regardless. What I like about Platonism that more aptly puts its finger on it is that rather than seeing things as this hierarchy, rigid, it is this corpus of things working together. The best way, because we've all heard "as above, so below," and it's things like that. But let's take a step and look at it from the Platonic perspective, where it's like, you have cells, and you have tissues, and you have organs, and you have organ systems, and you have an organism, and then you have a family, and then you have a community, and then you have a biosphere, and things like that. That way of looking at things as this grand community of things working together in concert towards a goal is so much more fitting with how we see the best of nature, as well as the worst, than what you see of this authoritarian concept of things, greater than. When something eats another thing, it becomes it, the alchemical aspects that you see. Because alchemy is deeply Aristotelian, because his method of doing it. The thing about this that you can credit with Aristotle is he provides a rubric to apply steps to a thing. And I think that's something that Plato didn't have. It was very, if you didn't have the intellectual capacity to encapsulate all of this stuff, you couldn't be Platonic. I mean, you couldn't do that. But if you, and you couldn't really easily communicate without being face to face and really knowing everything about what you're discussing. Whereas Aristotelianism allowed a step-by-step way of presenting things. This is why we have these beautiful color plates.
Oh, like this kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go back.
So these fantastic images that are laden with communicative imagery that was all meant to give the steps of the thing. This form of thinking, this Aristotle, it's funny because the church attempted to use Aristotle to control the entire flow of information, but it ended up working against them because these extraordinarily intelligent people use this rubric of amazing communication to talk about a step-by-step process to essentially meet the Hermetic goal of becoming God.
Let's get into, if you don't mind.
So who are those two figures? Can you tell me?
Well, I assume this is Dee and Kelly. It's probably yeah. I was thinking it was probably not.
It's not.
So
this is actually
like the common view of. Normally, when people see this image, they're like, "Oh, that's Dee and Kelly."
Nope, that's Paul Waring and Edward Kelly.
Okay.
We don't know much about him.
Okay, but he was just another kind of conjurer from that period?
Well, yeah, because it was a thing where it was not like, most people that were within education were within the same circles of communication. And eventually, if you were a person of learning that was pursuing things, this kind of came into your life at some point.
Yeah. I mean, the educated classes were doing this kind of thing in the fringes. I mean, it might have not been the main thing.
We don't know, and that's the thing, because folks were so good at, if you even look at, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. Later in life he wrote the Vanity of it, or I forget, De Vanitate. This book was essentially saying, "Oh, that's nonsense. This is you shouldn't believe in any of this. It's terrible. Don't do it." Anyways, I'm preserving this just because I want you all to be aware of the sin that I made. It was all these great overtures, and people are like, "Was he really disavowing this stuff?" I'm like, there's this thing where people actually take it at face value. And what I find fascinating about this is that no one is really... So the esoteric is about reading between the lines. That's what it all is. It's
right.
Yet there are these people that study that only take things at face value.
Of course.
If you...
It's the whole turning lead into gold thing.
Right. And it is a thing where... We touched on this earlier. And now we have this image of necromancy, and I'm going back to alchemy, and I apologize for that.
No, it's okay.
We touched on my mentor, Kem Kagan, being an alchemist, and he did have a full alchemical laboratory, including a fume hood so that he wouldn't die of mercurialism, right? And he said the thing about this is it wasn't people who expected to get riches don't really have the idea of it. Because if you look at the immense amount of effort that was being done and the work within the crucible and these small twinklings of something, of stepping on something deeply unknown, the fluorescent lights that buzz in your office that you hate so much, those work via mercury vapors. So when you have them in a crucible and you have them pressurized with all that heat and you open it and there's this momentary glow within it of that exact process. Good God, how would you not just absolutely pardon me, but shit your pants over seeing something incredible happening within that process. So these are the elements when you talk about searchers into nature that make this they're seeing something they can't explain that is incredibly mystical. Plus it's light.
You're right.
Which within that era, optics and lens grinding and the divine light, and you see Robert Flood's image of the divine light penetrating the skull, it all tied together in a very fascinating way that isn't easily put pen to paper because you aren't going to find any primary sources that state such a thing, nor are you going to find many secondary sources that make that correlation. What I've found is that academia is surprisingly ill-suited to explore esoteric concepts because it requires to take things at face value in a field where nothing's at face value. Now, anyways, I brought us back to alchemy and talking about the idea of reading between lines, and you were talking about necromancy. I apologize for that. Where were you going with this picture?
I was just going to ask you, I mean, we don't have time to go too deep into it, but like just on a surface level, I mean, I have my own ideas about it, but like when sigils were drawn upon on the ground,
I've got
and
it.
what 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 were they actually after, and by what theory or what rule of thumb were they trying to call or summon spirits through this? I
So,
mean, what's the physics of what's basically happening here, as far as
so
you know?
what you're looking at is um, when you draw a circle. First off, the circle is you said you're familiar with some Rosicrucian writings, yes?
A little bit.
Okay, Simon Studion's Naometria, the
Okay.
measurement of the temple. So this is the thing where you're essentially, when you create a circle, that's not a sigil, that's a circle, and that's quite different. What you're looking at
Okay.
is a pop-up area of practice. You don't have time to get out your table, you don't have time to get out your candles, and you don't have time to get out your, I guess, show stone if you're going to go the D route. You need to do something a bit more slapdash. You have a circle.
Okay.
So I don't know, within the paper, did you look at my dissection of um, the what is it, the Sigillum Dei Emeth?
No, I didn't
Okay,
get that far.
so that is that massive, huge thing that he had under sitting these wax tablets that were that huge star.
Right. Yeah. Which I've seen in the British Museum. Pretty cool.
So when you take those apart, what it is exactly this. You mentioned the Great Chain of Being, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that earlier.
Right. That was my intention, to kind of draw these two together, because I think they're related. So
Yes, they are very
okay.
much related. So what you do is that this is where you get that Aristotelian element. You have a hierarchy of entities going down. So you have, for example, if you're going to go actually classically, and you'll notice that if you have some listeners that are even conversant with like some things like the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, they're going to be like, that's not right. You're wrong. You have the elements attributed incorrectly, and I can show you how if you ever have time. But anyways, so the East, for example, is accorded to Raphael. Raphael, if you look in any grimoire, has this grand host of various and differing and conflicting entities underneath them. So what you're trying to create and discuss or contact are entities, and all the way down, kind of like it's almost like dialing a phone number, except you're winnowing it down until you reach exactly the entity of relevance of your ritual. So in this case, I assume it would be the dude in the funky robe with like the crazy, what is that, like a massive like nightgown with pillows on the front? I've never understood what that was. Anyways, so within the
Are
matters
you
of
talking about
death,
the figure that they appear to be summoning?
yes.
See,
So this would be
I just thought that was their irate neighbor who's like, "What the hell are you doing out
yeah,
here?
right.
It's
Just came
four in the
out angry at
morning."
night. So, anyways, that's a Saturnine ritual. So I assume that would
Yeah.
be coming underneath Saturn when you would use the Saturnian entities to and essentially when you talk about magic words, when they say these nonsense words in movies, those are the names of the angels accorded, probably drawn from some grimoire, more than likely Heptameron or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and you would state those names and then the intention of your ritual, and then basically wait for something to happen and then close the ritual out just like a Ouija board. You don't want to leave that stuff hanging around. So
Right.
that
Right.
is what's going on. So the names on there are yeah, look, there's Raphael's name right there. Interesting. I wonder if I could look up where I think I've looked up where that circle comes from. But I'm pretty sure that's probably not the one they used. I don't know. Anyways, or if it
Well,
even
cool.
happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even know the provenance of this picture. I just grabbed it off the internet really quickly, thinking, "Oh, I need a picture of D if I'm going to talk to Anthony." So I just popped it in there, and I didn't even do any research in terms of where this picture comes from or what it's supposed to be depicting. This has been very fascinating. I think there's a lot here in a lot of different directions we could go. We could probably talk for quite some time, but I think this is a
Yeah,
good
I
intro.
apologize for that.
What's that? I
I
feel like this is.
apologize for that. I have a
Oh no,
highly
no, no! This is a
discursive.
good thing. It's a great introduction to a lot of different directions that we can kind of explore. So, yeah, we'll hope to have you back on and share more of your vast knowledge of these topics.
I
So,
have to
yeah.
apologize, though. I do have to apologize because there's a very discursive way that Kem and I would explore things, and we would just go on and on and on, and it would start with something and end with like T-shirts or something. It would go
No, no,
from
no.
one place to another.
I enjoy that. I enjoy that. Every once in a while, I'm like, should I Should I chime in or just let you talk? And I kind of just wanted to let you talk and see where you went because I was curious. But thank you so much.
Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. It's always nice to talk about this.